Welcome to Harry Potter Abridged, the series where we read the Harry Potter books really fast, skipping over all the mundane details of Scar's hurting and Hermione being a nerd. Today we're going to start with Book 1, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And yes, it's the Philosopher's Stone, not the Sorcerer's Stone. So we're going to start with Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. And immediately, J.K. Rowling lets you know that this is a fantasy novel full of magic and mystery, because the Dursleys, a couple in their early 20s, they own their own house. And isn't that insane how times have changed, that when Harry Potter was written in the 90s, a couple with a stay-at-home mother could afford their own 3-bedroom semi-detached? So the book introduces us to the Dursleys, and Petunia's this long-necked, nosy neighbour. You know, everyone has one in the estate who just knows the colour of your knickers and you're walking down the road. And then, by contrast, she has Mr. Dursley, Vernon, who is built like a brick and sells drills. And their child, Dudley, is, the same as his father, just a beach ball of a child. And they introduce the idea that, these are the most normal people, but they have a dark secret in that Petunia's sister, Lily, is a weirdo. And they don't want to interact with her because she has her own son, who's also a weirdo. And it's something interesting that J.K. does immediately is by building this mystery around who Harry is. And it's quite Harry's arc, both especially in this book, but in the series in general, where a lot of this first chapter is based on the mystery of who Harry is. And it's Harry's arc in this book of finding out who he is himself. He learns that he's a wizard and is trying to find his place in the world. So it really sets the tone of us wondering who Harry is, for Harry wondering who he is throughout the entire novel and throughout the entire series. So the Dursleys wake up on a cloudy, boring day, and they're boring, and it's grey, and they're boring, and they go to work. And Mr. Dursley's on his way to work and he sees a cat reading his sign. And he's confused because cats don't read signs. And he looks back and the cat is mad dogging him. And we know later this is Professor McGonagall. And, if I was a cat person and Hitler, for who all intents and purposes Voldemort is, has just been defeated, would you spend your day, sitting on a wall? Wouldn't you pop out to the shops and get some catnip or something? But Mr. Dursley goes to work, tries to forget about the cats, and sees a bunch of Star Trek Comic-Con types who are out in the street being weird, and he doesn't like that. Mr. Dursley, he likes things to be boring, likes plain people in plain suits. And he's thinking about drills on his way to work. And he's getting more and more annoyed that these Trekkies are around and being different. So he eventually gets to the office and has his day, and he doesn't realise that there's owls flying around outside, and he goes to get a bun at work because Mr. Dursley doesn't pack his lunch. Who needs to bring a packed lunch? No chicken and rice for Mr. Dursley. He goes over and gets a bun. Mr. Dursley's quite a large man. I don't think a bun is going to be his daily caloric intake. And it's just again showing how times have changed. They own a home and they can afford to be eating out. What? This book is set in the 90s. So Mr. Dursley has a good day. He forgets about everything until he's coming back from his bun, and he hears whisper of the Potters, and that gets him thinking, oh no, because he doesn't think about the Potters, and neither does Petunia. And then he hears Harry, and he's not sure, and it's just constantly bringing back up who is Harry to the reader. And like I said, it evokes those themes of the entire novel of who is Harry Potter. So he gets back and he has a freak out. And then he goes home and he bumps into a small man who calls him a muggle, who says sorry, and he's happy and calls him a muggle, and he's really confused because he doesn't understand what this word means. And Mr. Dursley is very much a person who likes to know everything. And I've always had it in my head that this is Flitwick. I don't know why, because he's quite a small man, and the only person we meet in the novel whose height is really specified is Flitwick. Especially that he's a tiny old man, and I think it's Flitwick. I think the entire staff of Hogwarts are pulling a sick day. Voldemort just got defeated. Yeah, I think I have a headache. I'm gonna go party around in London and you know interact with the Muggles and mess with them for the day. So Vernon eventually goes home and brings up the fact that he's heard the Potter's name, and Petunia immediately shuts him down, and that's the end of that. They go to bed, and Vernon thinks, oh well, even if the Potters have done something, it's not going to impact him on his life. And oh boy, could he not be further from the truth. So it eventually then goes, and on his way home he's seen the cat, and all this is eventually put out of his mind as he goes to sleep. So then it switches perspective, and we find out that the cat isn't a cat. And as the lights are coming down, as Dumbledore appears, and the book does it's a really good way of letting us know things have changed, in that it says that everything from, like, I'll just read the description. It says, nothing like this man had ever been seen in Privet Drive. He was tall, he was old, he was thin, and his silver hair and beard went down to the back of his back. And he was in purple cloak and big boots, and he had a cigarette lighter that was putting the lights out. And immediately it's drawn to this mysticism of who is this magical character. And because he's such a juxtaposition, a change to the boring Dursleys, he's immediately held in some kind of mysticism and high regard. And again, this is something that continues throughout the series, of everybody holding Dumbledore up in this high light. And McGonagall she morphs back into herself, and we realise that maybe she was a furry all along. And they talk back and forth and start explaining. Dumbledore explains to her that yes, Voldemort is dead. We're bringing Harry here. Yeah, I know they're weird, but we don't want them getting a big head. Like, those celebrity kids, like Will Smith's kids, or Will Smith's kids, who kind of just get everything handed to them because their parents were famous. And Dumbledore doesn't want Harry being Jaden Smith. He doesn't want him thinking, what if the sky is really the floor, and things like that. He wants him to be grounded. He wants them to, he wants Harry to build himself up, even though he does have this legacy behind him. And McGonagall's, yeah, but like with these lot, it would be like if Beyonce's child was raised by people who didn't like music and never let them, and she's very against the idea of Harry being brought up by these, but we know from later books that there's this whole purpose of the family providing safety. And it also gives Harry, it humbles him. So we never really see Harry get into, that ego Kanye mode in the books. And I think a lot of that is to do with being the decision to give him to the Dursleys and keeping him grounded, and he always remembers where he came from. So they talk more about beating Voldemort and how James and Lily are dead, and it's all very sad. And then Dumbledore pulls out a bag of sweets and confuses McGonagall. And then we hear a motorbike come down, and it's Hagrid with baby Harry, and he got the motorbike from Sirius Black. And it's interesting to see Sirius mentioned so early and never mentioned again until it's time for his novel. which is the third, of course, the Prisoner of Azkaban. And we get a lot of name drops of, Godric's Hollow and how Dumbledore is super powerful, and he was the person that Voldemort was always afraid of, which is kind of strange that he was the only one. Like if you were to become powerful, if you were trying to take over the world, like if you're a Putin type, is the person you're most afraid of going to be your teacher? Especially because Dumbledore is the one who found him and stuff, and there is that. But your teachers, really? You know, I think the most frightening thing my teachers ever did to me was give me a bad report, and at the parent-teacher meetings would tell my parents that I was a little shit. And obviously, Tom Riddle doesn't have parents, so Dumbledore would have been just telling the empty chair that he was a little shit, and that Slytherin is, oh, kids being kids, and let's wipe out all the Muggle-borns, and yada yada yada. But you know, it's weird for someone taking over the world to be afraid of their teacher. But anyway, so we have Hagrid come down and he's talking about how all very sad it is that Harry is going to have to go live with the Dursleys and Lily and James are dead. And the book and the movies didn't really give too much of an impression of just how young Lily and James are at this point, because they're only 21. Like if you're in America, they've only been able to drink for a couple of months and they're involved in this war, and they've had a kid who's now going to go save the world. But anyway, so they're all saying their goodbyes, and you can feel that there's just been this monumental shift in their world, and it's something that would be quite interesting to explore in extra material, but I don't know if we really want that from Rowling at the moment. I don't think we need to know the frequency of their bowel movements or whatever her Twitter is doing nowadays. But yeah, and they leave Harry on the porch, and Dumbledore puts a letter in, and they disappear, and Harry rolls over and is woken the next morning by Petunia screaming. And you know what? Fair play to Petunia. She looks down when she walks out her door, because I think I would have punted the baby if I was to walk out, because I walk out in quite a hurry. And I wouldn't have looked to see the small child that was placed on the porch. I think that, Dumbledore can disappear at will. He could have played a bit of, ding dong ditch or whatever you call it, where he puts Harry down, puts the letter on in with him, and just rings the doorbell. Doesn't leave the small infant out in the middle of the night in the cold. And the coyotes will steal the baby. I don't know how many coyotes there are in Surrey, I think is where Privet Drive is, but you never know. And what if the child snatcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang had come along or something? I'm just saying, the least Dumbledore could have done is ring the doorbell and not, had Harry be cold all night as a baby and, nearly have milk bottles dropped on his head the next morning. But anyway, that was the end of chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in Harry Potter Abridged. Let me know what you guys think. This is a series that could be quite a lot of fun. I can probably reel in the tangents. I just like thinking of the book out loud, and it's fun. These books obviously had quite a big impact on me growing up, and I imagine if you're listening, they did for you too. Or maybe it's the first time you've ever read them, or maybe first time you've only ever seen the movie. So read along or watch along. But yeah, thank you all for listening, and any feedback is greatly appreciated.